Hello everybody, it's Merlin here, and I'm coming here today to bring you another discussion video. This was a video that was requested a little while ago, and I'll probably put it requested in links below if I can find it. Some older requests I'm trying to get out of the way. I just thought I'd do like a basic blog discussion for you guys because, well, I don't really think that it needs to be too formal, because this is a very, very basic question, but it has come up before, and it made me think, okay. The question was old versus new anime, which isn't really a question, I guess just basically thoughts on like the comparison. And first you have to say to yourself, what exactly does that mean? Old versus new anime. What are we talking about in the spectral relation of time here from your perspective? I'm guessing what that person meant, probably from their perspective, was anime that he watched or discovered over here when he was growing up or when he was discovering anime maybe 5-10 years ago, and anime that's been coming out the last couple years or so. I'm going to choose to look at it and say anime from the like 70s, 80s, and 90s to maybe the 2000s and up. You know, so for the last 10, 15 years versus everything else that came before that. So modern anime, so to speak. Well, I mean, I'm not going to lie, being somebody that's probably a little older than most of the people in the YouTube anime community and are getting into anime right now, obviously, you know, by about 10 years or so, you know, I have a different experience because, I mean, old for me is the stuff that is honestly some of my favorites. And you're always going to have a partial love of the things that you first discovered or grew up with, especially if it was influential in getting you into anime in the first place. Like for me, some obvious examples when you say old anime, you could say like, you know, Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, or even stuff like Digimon, Pokemon, Sailor Moon, and of course you could some of the early Adult Swim stuff like Cowboy Bebop, Fullmetal Alchemist, Cryad, Samurai Champloo, Paranoid Agent, all that stuff that was really influential in getting the people into other. You had some of the early Cartoon Network stuff like Kenshin and Trigun, Yu Yu Hakusho. You know, all these shows, like some of the early Gundams, they were influential in getting people into anime, you know, 5, 10, 15 years ago. And you've got some of the older stuff, you know, you've got some of the stuff that, you know, early release, like you know, like Fist of the North Star, and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and Berserk, some of which wasn't really discovered so much over here until about 5, 10 years ago. And there might have been some people that imported it and liked it and watched it back in the day, you know, older anime fans. But it's kind of getting a resurgence now. And that's the real question, because old versus new anime, there's kind of more of a link. I think some of the best examples are, you know, you've got JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, you've got Hunter x Hunter, which are some of the biggest anime series and manga out right now, even though technically they've been around for a lot longer, they're just being rediscovered now over here, and I guess to some extent in Japan. And then you've got some of the classics that have been around for decades, like Dragon Ball and Sailor Moon, and heck, even Digimon, getting reboots and continuations and reimaginings much more lately. So there's a kind of a nostalgic cycle. It's not just in anime, I've noticed it in movies and video games. People are bringing up classics, and I think that in any society, when you have people that started off as kids and loving something, they get to a point where they can start affording to get these things themselves. Of course they're fueled by nostalgia, and I think that's what we see in the anime here. Now, if the question was in regards to quality, which I'm sure that it certainly was, well, that's hard to say because, you know, things are always fluctuating. Do I think that, one of the wisest things I ever heard about this sort of question, it was basically, I think a couple of years ago, it was the question of, is anime getting worse or is anime dying? Is it, you know, just not as good as it used to be? And Masenko X, who voices Goku on Team 4-Star, he did a little vlog a while back talking about that. And basically, he brought up a very good point. You know, 20 years ago, you know, 15, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when anime was just starting to kind of get over here, the companies that were distributing them were releasing only the stuff they thought they could basically get money for, or whatever they could get their hands on that they could afford. So that's why a lot of the early manga releases and ADV and stuff like that, a lot of the stuff that Bennett the Sage reviews, for instance, a lot of that grittier, darker, more sexualized stuff that was kind of mostly focused on the special interest videos that you would find in the old rental stores, you know, more adult stuff, because people didn't really know how to market anime back then. So, you know, the quality of the storytelling was more adult and mature, even though the writing and honestly the dubbing and animation might not necessarily have been up to par. So if some people are more attached to that stuff, they might like certain things about it, because stylistically, anime around that time, more from Fist of the North Star or Saint Seiya, it was more masculine, it was more over the top, it was more exclusively violent a lot of the time, had more adult themes. I mean, even look at Fist of the North Star, for instance, was considered to be a shonen title, even though by more modern standards, it would seem not like a shonen title at all. We have One Piece, where, admittedly, as One Piece can be dark, it still seems like it's much more kid-friendly than Fist of the North Star. You know, there's no denying that, just judging by the actual animation of the violence itself. So there is that comparison there, but the point is, though, especially once it got along the ball there, once Funimation came about and started to really try to make anime a bigger boom for just increasing productivity in the United States, they would try to select the best titles that were selling over there, the biggest hits, generally. Not always, but you'd think, marketing-wise, well, let's see how it does well over here. And so that's why we only got the best stuff. So Fullmetal Alchemist, for me, is my favorite anime series, the original, and Brotherhood's very good as well, as I've said many times. But that's because Fullmetal Alchemist resonated with so many people because it was a show that was commercially and critically successful at the time and did really well over here, and so they kept running with it, and that basically became Funimation's primary show for a couple years. Like in 2006, 2005, around there, like that was their #1 show. That was their headlining show for a while there, you know, and that's because it did well. And the same thing with a lot of the other shows that they and other distributors kind of got a hold of and tried to market. You know, so it would only be the stuff that was the best, you know, more subjectively speaking, as you could say, or more objectively speaking, because they'd be basing it on how many people like it. I mean, look at, for instance, if you find out that there's like a Rotten Tomatoes in Japan, I'm not sure if there is, but if there's something like that that's testing really well over there, where people are watching this, people are buying this, people are talking about this and generally like it, you're more likely to send that over to the United States and see if that does well. Now, that's how it was. Things were a lot more selective. So to be honest, a lot of the anime, you know, a lot of the major anime that was released was generally pretty good, or most people thought so. Now, because anime is such a much easier to come across with Crunchyroll and everything, they can just find ways to get it to us, and we can literally stream now with Japan. We can get the chapters pretty much updated for the manga almost instantly, get them translated. You know, the internet was a big factor in that as well. So the last 10 years or so, last 10, 15 years, the relationship between anime fans in the US and Japan, and just our acceptance of it in anime and manga culture, in terms of the pop culture and the fandom, has really changed and grown, and we've gotten a lot more spoiled in that sense. So we can get everything now. We can get practically every series, you know, that is possible to get released, we can see over here. They'll just give us everything because they assume because we like anime, we'll check it out, which a lot of us will. But that means that, like anything, if you have a majority of anything, there's got to be some bad stuff in there. So that's the real question. There's always been a lot of bad stuff, and a lot of great stuff, and a lot of stuff in between. You just have to kind of watch it for yourself and determine that for yourself. I do think stylistically, though, you know, things also go through cycles, and anime has kind of shifted a bit more into the sleeker look now, kind of modeling after Clamp. I think has become much more stylistic, you know, very skinny, more feminine characters like from Code Geass and whatnot with Lelouch. I feel like there's a lot more anime series that kind of follow that pattern. I also think that there are a lot less masculine characters, a lot less heavily muscly animated characters like Kenshiro. You don't see that much anymore. The Anime Hero, check out his channel by the way, both of them. He's a big supporter of that idea, and he focuses a lot on that, how a lot of the older series from the 80s and 90s had that overt masculinity and that over-the-top violence, and just how that was more integral to those types of storylines. Whereas now, everything seems to be, I don't want to say it's watered down, because there are good things. Like, for instance, I mean, Parasite, once again, something older coming out, original, interesting. You've got Tokyo Ghoul. There's good stuff there, but it's kind of more shifted towards, I think, a broader audience, or more specific audience. I actually think that, from what I've seen, they're still trying to aim at a younger demographic. I think that's why Fairy Tail's still fairly popular. And even with Toriko, I think to some extent you could say that. Obviously Naruto, they're going to keep going. And I also think that, actually I'm kind of happy about this, but I think that shoujo stuff, particularly magical girl stuff, like with Madoka Box and Madoka Magica and Sailor Moon coming back, I feel like there's more of a focus on the female audience, because the female audience for anime, at least over here I thought, has always been fairly big. And I know it's not as big as the main shonen titles. Like, I mean, obviously, like One Piece and Naruto, those are primarily focused at young male demographics, but maybe it's just because of how I grew up and how I got into anime and the people I knew. There are always a lot of girls into anime and manga. Usually it was like, you know, yaoi and other stuff like that. But, you know, they liked other titles too, you know, plenty. But just typically more, you know, romance-focused type manga series and whatnot. But it's still a very big demographic to focus on. And I think that there's been a little more of a focus on that. Now, while I don't think that's bad, I think that style's bled into other types and other genres that maybe certain demographics might not be looking for as much. So that could create a problem for your viewership as well. To be fair, I guess in summation, I would say that I do think that the quality of great shows is lacking. Like, to give you an example, honestly, until Attack on Titan came out, and believe me, I got on that hype train. I'm done now for certain other reasons, but believe me, the Attack on Titan anime was very awesome. It was great. Attack on Titan was awesome. That was the first new release of an anime that I got really excited about. Probably, when did that come out? Like 2013? Probably since like 2008 or something. 2009. Like literally, that's probably the first like anime series I got really excited about in like 6-7 years at that point. So, you know, like to get that level of excitement. So, and I think for everybody too. I mean, look at, if you go to like a comic book convention, when I went to Philly earlier in the year, I remember there was like a little anime section for t-shirts you could get, and it was Death Note, Cowboy Bebop, Naruto, One Piece, Dragon Ball, and Attack on Titan. Think about that for a second. And this should kind of answer the question about old versus new anime in terms of impact. I think that little section there, admittedly it's kind of a very generic section for maybe amateur anime fans and whatnot, but I think that says something because it's to the broadest audience. You've got a couple series that are continuing now that have been popular for a long time. You've got a series that's incredibly popular that recently had a comeback. You know, that's been one of the most popular series ever. You've got other couple series that aren't quite as big, but still very influential with the anime community. And then you've got Attack on Titan, which is really big now. So that should tell you, those other series, if you want to count the ones that either started a long time ago and are still going, I mean, or Cowboy Bebop, for instance, which has been off for a while, those other ones are about 10, 15, 20, 25 years old. I mean, really, technically Dragon Ball, if you want to say the manga started, that's over 30 years old now. And that still has an impact, whereas Attack on Titan has the same level of interest for people, but it only came out a couple years ago. I mean, that should be an indicator right there. There's a good like 10, 15-year gap. If you want to say Naruto came out in the early 2000s, that's a good like 10, 15-year gap of sustainable, long-lasting anime fandom that had an impact. So, are there plenty of good series out there? Yes, I know there are. There are plenty of good series out there, absolutely, that you should check out. But I think that we have, because there's so much oversaturation now with what we get, it's harder for any one or two shows to really reach that level of hype. That's why the big three were just kind of sustaining everything for a long time, because that was where the main focus was on. It was hard for any other show to kind of get that level of hype because it doesn't have that wide audience. So, on the whole, that should pretty much tell you what I think about the topic. Old versus new anime, I think there's a lot of older stuff that's getting more appreciation now. For instance, Berserk, you know, it's just, and stuff like Monster is still sustaining that level of classic. Whereas I feel like there haven't been as many recent classics. I mean, Kill la Kill, Psychopaths are shows that might come to mind, but time will only tell if they'll live to that same level as something like Trigun, you know? So, let me know what you guys think about the topic. I think it is a very interesting discussion. So I definitely appreciate that. For a request, of course, check out this video, you know, subscribe, share, comment below. Check out my website at merlinthemighty.com. We'll be getting some more videos to you on there as well. Should be a Kenshin analysis coming up. And also check out Film Fanatics Podcast and the Fanta Group, my anime collab group. Alright guys, this is Merlin, signing off. Peace. And stay magical, my friends.